This has to be fake. The gate agent said it loud enough that the business travelers in the priority line turned to look. She was holding Dr. Olivia Henderson's boarding pass between two fingers like it was contaminated, her other hand already reaching for the phone to call security. "Ma'am," she said, her voice dripping with certainty, "this ticket shows a complimentary first-class upgrade with full access codes. We don't issue these to. I mean, this is clearly an error." Dr. Henderson stood at the counter at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, her leather briefcase at her feet, her expression neutral. She'd been through airport security 1,000 times. She'd flown more than 2 million miles in her career. She'd sat in cockpits with pilots, in boardrooms with airline CEOs, in federal hearing rooms where the future of American aviation was decided. But today, on this Sunday morning in February, she was being told her ticket was fake. Not because of the ticket itself, but because the woman behind the counter couldn't reconcile what she saw. A 54-year-old black woman in a simple emerald green suit and comfortable flats, with what the ticket represented. "There's no error," Dr. Henderson said quietly. "That's a valid boarding pass issued through the FAA travel authorization system. If you scan it, you'll see it's legitimate." The gate agent, her name tag read Susan Carroll, didn't scan it. She just kept staring at the pass, then at Dr. Henderson, then back at the pass. "Ma'am, I've been doing this job for 12 years. I know what fraudulent tickets look like. And this," she waved the paper, "this has all the hallmarks." "What hallmarks?" Dr. Henderson asked, her tone still calm but with a sharpness underneath that people who knew her would recognize as a warning. Susan leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice as if sharing a confidence. "These premium codes are only issued to airline executives, federal officials, and board members. They're not available to the general public. So unless you're telling me you work for the government." She let the sentence hang, her expression making it clear she found that possibility absurd. Dr. Henderson held her gaze. "I do work for the government," she said evenly. "I'm the director of the Aviation Safety and Standards Board. The ticket was issued by our travel office for official business." Susan's smile didn't waver. It actually grew a little wider. "Right," she said, the single word loaded with disbelief. "And I'm the Queen of England." Two passengers behind Dr. Henderson chuckled. Susan glanced at them, encouraged by the audience, and raised her voice slightly. "Listen, I don't know where you got this ticket or who made it for you, but I can't let you board with fraudulent credentials. I'm going to need you to step aside while I call airport security." Dr. Henderson took a slow breath through her nose. This wasn't the first time she'd encountered someone who couldn't see past their assumptions. It wouldn't be the last. But something about this moment, the public nature of it, the casual certainty in Susan's voice, the way other passengers were now watching with a mixture of pity and suspicion, lit a small, cold flame of determination in her chest. She'd spent 30 years in aviation. She'd earned a PhD in aerospace engineering from MIT. She'd worked as a safety investigator for the NTSB, as a technical consultant for 3 major airlines, and for the past 8 years, she'd served as the director of the Aviation Safety and Standards Board, a federal position that gave her oversight authority over every commercial flight in the United States. She'd earned every credential she carried. And she wasn't going to stand here and be treated like a criminal because someone couldn't imagine that a black woman might actually belong in first class. But she also knew that anger wouldn't solve this. Volume wouldn't solve this. What would solve this was patience, documentation, and letting the system do what it was supposed to do. So she pulled out her phone, opened her email, and found the travel authorization from her office. "Here," she said, turning the screen towards Susan. "This is the official travel authorization from the FAA. It includes my employee ID, my travel approval number, and confirmation of the ticket issuance. You can verify it with your supervisor if you'd like." Susan barely glanced at the screen. "Ma'am, I don't verify tickets from phones. Anyone can create a fake email." Dr. Henderson's jaw tightened, but her voice remained level. "Then call the FAA travel office. The number is on the authorization. They'll confirm my identity and the validity of the ticket." "I'm not calling anyone based on a passenger's instruction," Susan said, her tone now shifting from skepticism to irritation. "You're holding up the line and I need you to step aside. Now." The passengers behind Dr. Henderson were getting restless. One man, white 50s, expensive suit, spoke up. "Come on, lady. Some of us have flights to catch." Dr. Henderson turned slightly. "I have a flight to catch too, and a valid ticket." "Then stop arguing and let them sort it out," the man said. Dr. Henderson turned back to Susan. "I'm not stepping aside," she said quietly. "I haven't done anything wrong. My ticket is valid, and I'm asking you again to verify it properly before making accusations." Susan's face flushed. "Fine," she said sharply. "You want me to verify it, I'll verify it." She picked up the phone and pressed a button. "This is Gate 12. I need security. I have a passenger refusing to comply with crew instructions and presenting what appears to be a fraudulent first-class ticket." Dr. Henderson closed her eyes for a brief moment. And then she did something Susan didn't expect. She pulled out her work credentials, a federal ID badge in a leather holder, and set it on the counter. "Before security arrives," Dr. Henderson said, her voice still calm, "you might want to look at this." Susan glanced down at the badge. Her expression shifted, just slightly, from confidence to confusion. The badge was official, federal seal, photo ID, and a title that read, "Dr. Olivia M. Henderson, Director, Aviation Safety and Standards Board, Federal Aviation Administration." Susan blinked, picked up the badge, looked at the photo, then at Dr. Henderson, then back at the photo. This could be fake too," Susan said, but her voice had lost its certainty. "It's not," Dr. Henderson said. "But if you want to verify it, I suggest you call your station manager, or airport security, or the FAA. Because when they get here, they're going to confirm exactly what I've been telling you. I'm a federal official traveling on official business, and you've just accused me of fraud in front of 50 witnesses." Susan's hand holding the badge was trembling slightly. She set it down carefully. I was just doing my job," she said, but the defensiveness was already creeping into her voice. "Your job is to verify tickets," Dr. Henderson said, "not to make assumptions about who can and cannot afford first class. If you'd simply scan my boarding pass like I asked, we wouldn't be having this conversation." Before Susan could respond, 2 airport security officers arrived. One man, one woman, both in uniform. The male officer, whose name tag read Martinez, approached the counter. "What's the issue?" he asked. Susan spoke quickly. "I received a ticket that appeared fraudulent. I was attempting to verify." "The ticket is valid," Dr. Henderson interrupted, her voice still calm but firm. "As is my federal ID. This agent refused to verify either and instead called security based on an assumption." Officer Martinez looked at the boarding pass, then at the federal ID, then at Dr. Henderson. His expression shifted immediately. "Dr. Henderson," he said, his tone respectful, "I apologize for the confusion. Your credentials are clearly in order." He turned to Susan. "What was the issue with the ticket?" Susan stammered. "I thought the codes looked unusual. I've never seen." "Did you scan it?" Officer Martinez asked. "No, Why not?" Susan didn't have an answer. Officer Martinez sighed. "Ma'am," he said to Dr. Henderson. "Again, I apologize. You're cleared to board. Is there anything else you need?" "Just my boarding pass," Dr. Henderson said. Susan handed it over without a word, her face now pale. Dr. Henderson took the pass, picked up her briefcase, and walked toward the boarding door. She didn't look back. But as she stepped into the jetway, she heard Officer Martinez's voice, quiet but sharp. "We need to talk about your verification procedures, now." Dr. Henderson boarded the plane, found her seat, 1A first class window, and sat down. Her hands were shaking. Not from anger. From exhaustion. Because this moment, this assumption, this burden of proof, was something she carried every time she traveled. And she was tired. So tired. But she was also something else. Determined. Because what had just happened wasn't just about her. It was about every black professional who'd been questioned, doubted, and dismissed. And Dr. Olivia Henderson didn't just have the authority to address it. She had the responsibility. The flight from Dallas to Washington, D.C. was 2 hours and 43 minutes. Dr. Henderson spent most of it staring out the window, thinking. She thought about Susan Carroll's face, the certainty, the dismissiveness, the shock when confronted with evidence. She thought about the passengers who'd watched and said nothing. She thought about Officer Martinez, who'd at least been professional once he saw her credentials. But mostly, she thought about the system. Because this wasn't an isolated incident. This was a pattern. And patterns could be measured, documented, and changed. Dr. Henderson pulled out her laptop and opened a new document. Subject, Incident Report, Passenger Profiling at DFW Gate 12. She documented everything. The time, the gate, Susan Carroll's name and employee number visible on her name tag, the exact words used, the witnesses, Officer Martinez's response. Everything. When she finished, she saved the document and opened another file, one she'd been compiling for the past 3 years. It was a database of complaints filed with the Aviation Safety and Standards Board regarding discriminatory treatment at airports. Complaints from passengers of color who'd been questioned about their tickets, about their credentials, about their right to be in first class, in business class, in the airport at all. Most of the complaints had been filed, acknowledged, and quietly dismissed by airline customer service departments. A few had resulted in apologies. None had resulted in systemic change. Dr. Henderson added her own incident to the database. And then she did something else. She pulled up the contact information for every major airline CEO, every airport authority director, and every member of the Congressional Aviation Subcommittee. And she began drafting an email. Not angry. Not accusatory. Just factual. Subject, Federal Review of Passenger Profiling Practices in U.S. Aviation. Dear colleagues, as Director of the Aviation Safety and Standards Board, I am writing to inform you of an emerging pattern that warrants immediate attention and coordinated response. Over the past 3 years, our office has received 847 formal complaints from passengers alleging discriminatory treatment at airport gates, security checkpoints, and during boarding processes. These complaints share common elements: passengers of color being questioned about ticket validity, upgrade legitimacy, or their right to access premium cabin services. Today, I personally experienced this pattern when a gate agent at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport refused to verify my valid federal travel authorization, accused me of presenting fraudulent credentials, and called security, despite my repeated requests for standard verification procedures. This email serves as formal notification that the Aviation Safety and Standards Board will be launching a comprehensive review of passenger profiling practices across all U.S. carriers and major airports. This review will include 1. Analysis of complaint patterns and demographics. 2. Evaluation of current anti-discrimination training protocols. 3. Assessment of verification procedures and their consistent application. 4. Recommendations for federal standards and enforcement mechanisms. I am requesting voluntary participation from all major carriers in this review. Those who decline will be subject to mandatory compliance audits under Section 44706 of Title 49, United States Code. I will be scheduling stakeholder meetings beginning next month. Formal invitations will follow within 2 weeks. This is not punitive, this is corrective, and it is necessary. Respectfully, Dr. Olivia M. Henderson, Director, Aviation Safety and Standards Board, Federal Aviation Administration. She read it 3 times, revised it twice, and then she hit send to 47 recipients. And then she closed her laptop, leaned back in her seat, and waited for the response she knew was coming. The response came before the plane landed. Her phone, on airplane Wi-Fi, started buzzing with email notifications. The first was from Thomas Brennan, CEO of Delta Airlines. Dr. Henderson, I've received your email. This is concerning. Can we schedule a call this week to discuss Delta's participation in the review? TB. The second was from Senator Patricia Morris, chair of the Aviation Subcommittee. Olivia, I just read your email. I'm appalled by what happened to you. Let's talk soon. I think we need a hearing on this. Pat. The third was from her own boss, the FAA administrator. Olivia, I support this review fully. You have whatever resources you need. Let me know how I can help. Robert. By the time the plane touched down at Reagan National, she had responses from 12 airline CEOs, 4 airport authorities, and 3 members of Congress, all expressing concern, all offering cooperation, all suddenly very interested in addressing a problem they'd been ignoring for years. Dr. Henderson gathered her things and deplaned. As she walked through the terminal, her phone rang. She answered, "This is Dr. Henderson." "Dr. Henderson, this is Michael Torres, Senior VP of Customer Experience for American Airlines. I just read about the incident at DFW. On behalf of American, I want to apologize. This is unacceptable, and we're taking immediate action." "What kind of action?" Dr. Henderson asked, not slowing her pace. "We've placed the gate agent on administrative leave pending an investigation. We're reviewing all complaints filed against her, and we're expediting the rollout of our updated bias training program." "How many complaints have been filed against her?" Dr. Henderson asked. There was a pause. I'd have to get back to you on the exact number." "Get back to me," Dr. Henderson said, "because if this is a pattern, administrative leave isn't enough." "Understood," Michael said. "Dr. Henderson, can I ask, what can American do to support your review?" "Provide full access to your complaint data," Dr. Henderson said, "broken down by passenger demographics, complaint type, and resolution outcome. I want to see 3 years of records." That's a lot of data." "I'm aware," Dr. Henderson said. "That's the point." "I'll have our team start pulling it together," Michael said. "Good," Dr. Henderson said. "I'll expect it within 2 weeks." She hung up and kept walking. By the time Dr. Henderson reached her car in the airport parking garage, her inbox had 34 new messages. Apologies, offers of cooperation, requests for meetings, and one message that stood out. It was from a woman named Marlene Washington, president of the National Association of Black Aviation Professionals. "Dr. Henderson, I don't know if you remember me. We met briefly at the aerospace conference in Atlanta 2 years ago. I just heard about what happened to you at DFW, and I wanted to reach out." This happens to our members constantly. Gate agents questioning their tickets, TSA agents demanding extra screening, flight attendants assuming they're in the wrong seat. We've been documenting these incidents for years, but we've struggled to get anyone to take them seriously. Your email to the airlines and Congress has already made waves. People are paying attention. If there's any way our association can support your review, data, testimony, whatever you need, please let us know. Thank you for using your platform to address this. It matters more than you know. Respectfully, Marlene Washington. Dr. Henderson sat in her car and read the email twice. Then she typed a response. Marlene, I remember you, and I'd very much like your association's participation in this review. Can we schedule a call this week? This isn't just about policy. It's about lived experience, and your members' stories need to be part of the record. Best, Olivia. She sent the email and started her car. But before she pulled out of the parking space, she sat for a moment and allowed herself to feel it. The weight of what she just set in motion. The responsibility. The risk. Because she knew what was coming. Pushback from airlines who didn't want federal oversight. Criticism from people who thought she was being too sensitive. Accusations that she was using her position for personal revenge. She'd heard it all before. But she also knew something else. She was right. The data supported her. The law supported her. And the hundreds of passengers who'd been humiliated, questioned, and dismissed, they supported her too. So she took a breath, put the car in gear, and drove home. The next morning, Dr. Henderson arrived at her office in downtown Washington at 7:15 a.m. The Aviation Safety and Standards Board occupied the 6th floor of a modern federal building near Union Station. Her assistant, James Chen, a meticulous 32-year-old with a master's in public policy, was already at his desk. Morning, Dr. Henderson, he said. I saw your email to the airlines. My phone's been ringing off the hook. Let me guess, Dr. Henderson said. Everyone wants to talk. Everyone wants to explain, James corrected. I've got 12 meeting requests, 6 phone calls flagged as urgent, and 3 reporters asking for interviews. Dr. Henderson set down her briefcase. Decline the interviews for now. Schedule the meetings, but not until after we've finalized the review framework. I want to control the narrative, not react to theirs. Smart, James said. He hesitated. Dr. Henderson, can I ask, what happened at DFW? She told him. When she finished, James was quiet for a moment. I'm sorry that happened to you, he said. Thank you, Dr. Henderson said. But I'm not looking for sympathy. I'm looking for data. I need you to pull every complaint we've received in the past 3 years related to discriminatory treatment at airports. Sort by airline, airport, type of complaint, and demographic information if available. That's going to be a lot of complaints, James said. I know, Dr. Henderson said. That's why we're doing this. James nodded. I'll get started. Dr. Henderson walked into her office, a corner space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Capitol, and closed the door. She sat at her desk and opened her laptop. 47 new emails since last night. She started reading. Most were variations on the same theme: concern, apologies, offers of cooperation. But one stood out. It was from Susan Carroll. Dr. Henderson, I don't know if you'll read this, but I wanted to apologize. I made assumptions yesterday that were wrong and hurtful. I let my own biases cloud my judgment, and I'm deeply sorry. I've been placed on leave, and I'm told there will be an investigation. I deserve that. But I also want you to know that I'm committed to learning from this and doing better. I know my apology doesn't undo what I did, but I hope you can accept it anyway. Sincerely, Susan Carroll. Dr. Henderson read the email 3 times. It was short, simple, and it sounded genuine. But Dr. Henderson had been in this position before, receiving apologies from people who'd only realized their mistake after facing consequences. Apologies motivated by fear, not growth. She believed in second chances. She believed people could change. But she also believed that change required more than words. It required action. So she typed a response. Ms. Carroll, I appreciate your apology. I also hope you'll use this experience to examine why you made the assumptions you did and how those assumptions affect others. If you're sincere about learning, I'd encourage you to participate in bias training, not because it's required, but because you choose to. Respectfully, Dr. Olivia Henderson. She sent the email and moved on to the next message. Over the next 2 weeks, Dr. Henderson's office became a hub of activity. James compiled the complaint data, and the numbers were staggering. 847 formal complaints over 3 years. 643, 76%, involved passengers of color. 512, 60%, occurred at gate areas or during boarding. 287, 34%, involved questions about ticket validity or upgrade legitimacy. 156, 18%, resulted in passengers being denied boarding. Only 23, 3%, resulted in any disciplinary action against airline staff. Dr. Henderson sat with the data for hours, analyzing patterns. Certain airlines had higher complaint rates. Certain airports were hotspots. But the most damning pattern was this. Complaints from white passengers were resolved at a rate of 68%. Complaints from passengers of color were resolved at a rate of 12%. Dr. Henderson printed the analysis and added it to her growing file. She also scheduled meetings with the National Association of Black Aviation Professionals, the NAACP, and 3 civil rights law firms who'd been tracking similar patterns. Marlene Washington flew to D.C. to meet with her in person. They sat in Dr. Henderson's office on a Thursday afternoon, the data spread across the conference table. Marlene, a woman in her early 60s with silver locks and sharp eyes, reviewed the numbers silently. When she finished, she looked up. "This is exactly what we've been seeing," she said, "but we've never had anyone with your authority willing to take it on." "I'm taking it on," Dr. Henderson said, "but I need more than data. I need stories. I need your members to go on the record, not for media, not yet, but for the formal review. Their experiences need to be documented as part of the federal record." "They'll do it," Marlene said. "We've been waiting for someone to ask." "Good," Dr. Henderson said, "because this isn't just about policy changes. It's about accountability, and accountability requires evidence." Marlene nodded. "What's your timeline?" "Stakeholder meetings start next week," Dr. Henderson said. "I'm bringing in airline executives, airport authorities, and advocacy groups. I want everyone in the same room, looking at the same data. After that, we'll draft policy recommendations and submit them to the FAA administrator and Congress." "How long?" Marlene asked. 6 months, Dr. Henderson said. "Maybe less if we move fast." Marlene smiled. 6 months after decades of complaints, that's something. "It's a start," Dr. Henderson said. The first stakeholder meeting was held on a Tuesday morning in a conference room at the FAA headquarters. 34 people attended. CEO and senior executives from Delta, United, American, Southwest, and JetBlue. Airport Authority directors from DFW, O'Hare, LAX, JFK, and Hartsfield-Jackson. Representatives from the TSA and Department of Transportation. Civil rights attorneys and advocacy groups. And Dr. Olivia Henderson, sitting at the head of the table. She opened the meeting with a slide presentation. The first slide was simple. 847 complaints, 3 years, 12% resolution rate for passengers of color. The room was silent. Dr. Henderson didn't rush. She let the numbers sit. Then she clicked to the next slide. Personal experience, March 15, 2024, DFW Gate 12. She told the story. Not emotionally. Not dramatically. Just factually. When she finished, she looked around the table. This review is not about me, she said. It's about the 847 passengers who filed complaints, the thousands more who didn't, and the pattern of bias that allows people like Ms. Carroll to make assumptions without consequence. Thomas Brennan, the Delta CEO, spoke first. Dr. Henderson, I want to say again, what happened to you was unacceptable, and Delta is committed to being part of the solution. Good, Dr. Henderson said. Then you'll have no problem sharing your complaint data, broken down by passenger demographics and resolution outcomes. Brennan hesitated. That data is sensitive. It's also necessary, Dr. Henderson said. If you're serious about addressing this, you'll provide transparency. Brennan glanced at his legal counsel, then nodded. We'll provide it. Dr. Henderson turned to the United representative. United. We'll provide it, the man said. One by one, each airline agreed. Dr. Henderson moved to the next slide. Proposed policy framework. 1. Mandatory bias training for all customer-facing airline and airport staff, with annual recertification. 2. Standardized verification procedures for all tickets, with documentation requirements. 3. Independent complaint review process, with oversight from the Civil Rights Division of DOT. 4. Public reporting of complaint demographics and resolution outcomes. 5. Financial penalties for airlines, with sustained patterns of discriminatory treatment. The airline executives shifted uncomfortably. A Southwest executive raised his hand. Dr. Henderson, some of these recommendations, particularly the penalties, feel punitive. They're corrective, Dr. Henderson said. Right now, there's no incentive for airlines to address this. Complaints are dismissed. Staff face no consequences. Passengers give up and move on. Financial penalties create accountability. But they also create legal exposure, the executive said. As they should, Dr. Henderson said, because what we're talking about is a violation of civil rights, and civil rights violations should have consequences. The room was tense, but no one argued, because the data was undeniable. And Dr. Olivia Henderson had done something rare in federal policymaking. She'd made the invisible visible. Over the next 3 months, Dr. Henderson led a series of working groups to refine the policy framework. She met with flight attendants, gate agents, and TSA officers, frontline workers who shared their own experiences with implicit bias and lack of training. She met with civil rights attorneys who'd been fighting these battles in court for years. She met with members of Congress who were drafting legislation to codify her recommendations. And throughout it all, she kept coming back to one question. How do we make sure this actually changes things? Because she'd seen well-intentioned policies fail before. She'd seen training programs that checked boxes but didn't change behavior. She'd seen complaint systems that protected institutions instead of people. So she built in accountability mechanisms. Real ones. Independent oversight. Public reporting. Financial consequences. And one more thing. She insisted that every airline create a passenger advocate position, a dedicated role responsible for reviewing complaints, mediating disputes, and ensuring fair treatment. The airlines pushed back. That's expensive, they said. So is a discrimination lawsuit, Dr. Henderson replied. They agreed. By June, the policy framework was complete. Dr. Henderson presented it to the FAA administrator, who approved it. She presented it to the Congressional Aviation Subcommittee, who praised it. And she presented it to the airline CEOs, who, reluctantly, committed to implementation. The final piece was a public announcement. The FAA scheduled a press conference for June 28th. Dr. Henderson would present the new standards. The airline CEOs would commit to compliance. And passengers across the country would finally have protections that had been missing for decades. The night before the press conference, Dr. Henderson sat in her home office, reviewing her remarks. Her phone rang. She answered, "This is Dr. Henderson." "Dr. Henderson, this is Marlene Washington. I just wanted to call and say thank you." Dr. Henderson leaned back in her chair. "Thank me after we see if it actually works." "It's already working," Marlene said. "Do you know how many calls I've gotten from our members in the past month? People telling me they filed complaints and actually got responses. People saying gate agents are being more careful. People feeling like someone's finally listening." Dr. Henderson felt her throat tighten. "That's good to hear," she said quietly. "You did this," Marlene said. "You took something that happened to you and turned it into something that helps everyone. That's leadership." Dr. Henderson didn't know what to say. So she just said, "Thank you." After they hung up, Dr. Henderson sat in the quiet of her office for a long time. She thought about Susan Carroll. She thought about the passengers who'd watched and said nothing. She thought about the system that had allowed this to happen for so long. And she thought about the small, stubborn flame of determination that had pushed her to do something instead of just letting it go. Tomorrow, that flame would become policy. Tomorrow, the system would change. Not because she'd been loud, but because she'd been patient. Not because she demanded attention, but because she'd done the work. The press conference was held in the FAA headquarters auditorium. The room was packed with reporters, advocates, and airline representatives. Dr. Henderson stood at the podium, wearing a charcoal suit and her federal credentials. She looked out at the crowd and began. "Good morning. My name is Dr. Olivia Henderson, Director of the Aviation Safety and Standards Board. I'm here today to announce new federal standards for passenger treatment in U.S. aviation." She clicked to the first slide. These standards address a pattern that has persisted for too long: discriminatory treatment of passengers based on race, ethnicity, and other protected characteristics. Over the past 3 years, our office has documented 847 formal complaints, but we know the real number is much higher because most passengers don't report their experiences. She clicked to the next slide, showing the demographic breakdown. These complaints are not random. They follow a pattern. Passengers of color are questioned at higher rates. They're denied boarding at higher rates, and their complaints are dismissed at higher rates. She paused. "This is unacceptable, and it ends today." She outlined the new standards: mandatory bias training, standardized verification procedures, independent complaint review, public reporting, financial penalties for noncompliance. And then she said something she'd added to her remarks at the last minute. "These standards aren't just about policy. They're about dignity. Every passenger who boards a plane deserves to be treated with respect, not because of their status, their appearance, or their ability to prove they belong, but because they're human beings." The room was silent. "I know these standards will require work. I know they'll be challenging to implement, but I also know they're necessary, because the cost of doing nothing, the cost of allowing bias to continue unchecked, is too high." She closed with this: 3 months ago, I was standing at a gate at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport being told my federal credentials were fake, being questioned, being dismissed, and I had a choice: let it go or do something about it. I chose to do something, not because I wanted attention, not because I was angry, but because I knew I wasn't the only one, and I knew I had the authority to change things. These new standards are the result of that choice. They represent months of work by dedicated staff, collaboration with airlines and advocacy groups, and input from hundreds of passengers who have experienced what I experienced. They won't solve everything, but they're a start. Thank you. The room erupted in applause. After the press conference, Dr. Henderson was approached by dozens of people. Advocates thanking her, reporters asking for interviews, airline executives reiterating their commitment. But the person who stood out was a young black woman, maybe 25, who waited until the crowd had thinned. "Dr. Henderson," she said, "I'm sorry to bother you, but I just wanted to say thank you." "Of course," Dr. Henderson said. "What's your name?" "Jasmine," the woman said. "I'm a first-year law student at Georgetown. I want to work in civil rights, and watching you today, it reminded me why I'm doing this." Dr. Henderson smiled. "What reminded you?" "The way you didn't back down," Jasmine said. "The way you used your position to help people who don't have the same power. That's what I want to do." Dr. Henderson felt something warm spread through her chest. "Then you will," she said. "And when you do, remember, change doesn't come from being loud, it comes from being thorough." Jasmine nodded. "I'll remember." She walked away, and Dr. Henderson stood in the now empty auditorium, feeling something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. 6 months after the new standards were implemented, the data started coming in. Complaint rates hadn't dropped significantly, which Dr. Henderson actually saw as a good sign, because it meant passengers felt empowered to report. But resolution rates had skyrocketed. Complaints from passengers of color were now being resolved at a rate of 64%, up from 12%. Bias training completion rates were at 89% across all major airlines. And perhaps most significantly, 3 airlines had faced financial penalties for sustained patterns of discrimination. One had been publicly named in a DOT report, and one gate agent, not Susan Carroll, but another with a similar pattern, had been terminated after an independent review. The system was working. Not perfectly, but measurably. Dr. Henderson received a letter from a passenger named Marcus Thompson. "Dr. Henderson, I'm a black businessman who flies 150,000 miles a year. For years, I've been questioned about my upgrades, asked for extra ID, and treated like I don't belong in first class. Last week, I flew from Atlanta to San Francisco. The gate agent scanned my ticket without comment. The flight attendant welcomed me aboard professionally, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to prove myself. I know that sounds small, but it's not, it's everything. Thank you for doing this work, it matters. Respectfully, Marcus Thompson." Dr. Henderson read the letter twice, then filed it with the others she'd received. Dozens of them. From passengers who'd noticed the change, who felt seen, who felt respected. That's what made it worth it. A year after the incident at DFW, Dr. Henderson received an email from Susan Carroll. "Dr. Henderson, I don't know if you remember me. I was the gate agent who questioned your ticket at DFW last year. I wanted to reach out because I've been going through the bias training program, not just the required modules, but additional workshops on my own time. I've learned a lot about my own assumptions and how they affected my work. I've also started volunteering with a local organization that helps formerly incarcerated individuals navigate air travel. Many of them have never flown before and face their own forms of discrimination. Working with them has helped me understand what I put you through. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that your response to what I did creating policy instead of just punishing me, gave me the space to grow. And I'm trying to use that growth to help others. Thank you, Susan Carroll. Dr. Henderson read the email slowly. Then she typed a response. Ms. Carroll, thank you for reaching out. I'm glad to hear you're doing the work. Real change requires self-examination, and it sounds like you're committed to that. Keep going and keep helping others. Respectfully, Dr. Olivia Henderson. She sent the email and closed her laptop. And for the first time in a year, she felt like the weight she'd been carrying was a little lighter. Not because Susan Carroll had apologized, but because the apology came with action. And action, real, sustained, documented action, was the only thing that mattered. 2 years after implementing the new standards, Dr. Henderson was invited to speak at the National Aviation Conference in Chicago. The theme was Equity and Access in American Aviation. She stood on the stage in front of 2,000 industry professionals and told her story. Not the story of being questioned at the gate, but the story of what came after. When I was standing at that counter, she said, I had a choice. I could have yelled. I could have demanded immediate justice. I could have used my position to embarrass the person who'd wronged me. But I didn't, because I knew that moment wasn't about revenge. It was about revelation. She clicked to a slide showing the complaint data. This data reveals something uncomfortable. Bias exists in our industry. It's not always loud. It's not always intentional, but it's real, and it has consequences. She clicked to the next slide, showing resolution rates before and after the new standards. But this data also reveals something hopeful. Systems can change. People can change. When we create accountability, when we provide training, when we empower passengers to speak up and staff to do better, things improve. She clicked to the final slide, a quote from Marcus Thompson's letter. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to prove myself. That, Dr. Henderson said, is the goal, not perfection, not the elimination of all bias overnight, but progress. Measurable, sustained, meaningful progress. And it starts with a choice. The choice to see a problem and do something about it. The choice to use your authority not to punish but to protect. The choice to believe that people and systems can be better. The room was silent. Then someone started clapping. Then another. Then the entire auditorium rose to their feet. Dr. Henderson stood at the podium, looking out at the crowd, and felt something she rarely allowed herself to feel. Pride. Not in herself, but in what had been built. In the passengers who now flew with dignity. In the staff who now had training and accountability. In the system that, slowly, imperfectly, but measurably, was becoming more just. 3 years after the incident, Dr. Henderson announced her retirement from the Aviation Safety and Standards Board. She was 57 years old. She'd spent 33 years in aviation. And she was ready to rest. Her successor was a man named David Park, a former airline executive who'd been instrumental in implementing the bias training programs. On her last day, the staff threw her a small reception in the office. James Chen gave a speech. Marlene Washington sent flowers. And Dr. Henderson gave brief remarks. I didn't plan to end my career this way, she said. I didn't wake up one day and decide to become an advocate for passenger rights. I was just a woman trying to board a plane. But when I was dismissed, when I was questioned, when I was treated like I didn't belong, I made a choice. I chose to believe that my experience mattered, not because I'm special, but because I'm not alone, and I chose to use the authority I'd earned to create change. That's what I hope you all remember. Authority isn't about power. It's about responsibility. And the greatest responsibility any of us have is to use what we've been given to make things better for the people who come after us. Thank you for letting me do that here. The room was quiet. Then James stepped forward and hugged her. And Dr. Henderson, who'd spent her entire career maintaining professional distance, staying calm, staying controlled, let herself cry. Just a little. In retirement, Dr. Henderson stayed connected to the work. She served on advisory boards. She mentored young professionals. She wrote op-eds and gave occasional speeches. But mostly she flew. Not for work, just for the joy of it. She visited her daughter in San Francisco, her grandchildren in Atlanta. She took trips she'd been putting off for decades. And every time she boarded a plane, she noticed the small things. The gate agents who scanned tickets without assumption. The flight attendants who greeted every passenger with the same warmth. The system that, while not perfect, was better than it had been. On one flight from D.C. to Dallas, she was standing in the priority boarding line when the gate agent looked at her ticket and smiled. "Dr. Henderson," the agent said, "it's an honor to have you on board today." Dr. Henderson blinked. "You know who I am." The agent, a young black woman, maybe 30, nodded. "Your photo is in our training materials. You're the reason we have the protocols we have now." Dr. Henderson felt her throat tighten. "Thank you," she said quietly. "No," the agent said, "thank you." Dr. Henderson boarded the plane, found her seat and sat down. And for the first time in her entire flying career, she felt something she'd never quite felt before. Safe. Not just physically, but emotionally. Safe to be herself. Safe to exist without proof. Safe to belong. 5 years after the incident, Dr. Henderson was contacted by a documentary filmmaker. The filmmaker wanted to tell the story of the bias standards, how they came to be, the impact they'd had, and the woman who'd created them. Dr. Henderson initially declined. "I don't need recognition," she told the filmmaker. "The work speaks for itself." But the filmmaker persisted. "It's not about recognition," she said. "It's about documentation. 20 years from now, when these standards are just normal practice, people won't remember how hard it was to get them implemented. They won't remember the resistance. They won't remember you standing at that gate, being questioned, and choosing to do something about it. I want to make sure they remember." Dr. Henderson thought about that. About legacy. About the young professionals who told her she inspired them. About the passenger who'd written to say the standards had changed their experience. About Susan Carroll, who'd done the work to change. And she agreed. The documentary took a year to produce. It featured interviews with airline executives, advocacy groups, passengers, and Dr. Henderson herself. It premiered at the Tribeca Film Festival and was later picked up by a major streaming service. Dr. Henderson watched it at home with her daughter and grandchildren. When it ended, her daughter turned to her. "Mom, I had no idea how hard you fought for this." Dr. Henderson smiled. "I didn't fight, I just did the work." "That's fighting," her daughter said. 10 years after the incident, Dr. Henderson was invited back to DFW to speak at an event celebrating a decade of the bias standards. She accepted. She flew to Dallas on a Tuesday morning. And when she arrived at Gate 12, the same gate where it had all started, there was a plaque on the wall. In recognition of Dr. Olivia M. Henderson, whose courage and commitment to justice transformed aviation standards and ensured dignity for all passengers. May we never forget that change begins with a single choice. Dr. Henderson stood in front of the plaque for a long time. She thought about that day, about Susan Carroll's face, about the weight of the moment, about the choice she'd made. And she thought about all the passengers who'd benefited from that choice. The ones who'd never know her name. The ones who'd never have to prove they belonged. The ones who could board a plane and just fly. That's what made it worth it. Not the plaque, not the recognition, but the quiet, invisible, undeniable fact that the system was better, because she'd refused to let the moment pass. There are moments when the world asks you to prove yourself. Moments when assumptions become accusations. Moments when you can choose to shrink or to stand. Dr. Olivia Henderson stood. Not with volume, not with anger, but with something more powerful. Patience, preparation, and an unshakable belief that systems built on bias could be rebuilt on justice. She didn't yell at the gate agent. She didn't demand immediate vindication. She documented. She analyzed. She built. And in doing so, she changed not just her own experience, but the experience of millions of passengers who would never know her name. That's the quiet power of competence. The dignity of doing the work when no one is watching. The strength of believing that your experience matters, not because you're special, but because you're not alone. Susan Carroll learned that day that assumptions have costs. The airlines learned that bias has consequences. And Dr. Olivia Henderson learned what she'd always known, but had never fully claimed. That her voice, calm, measured, backed by evidence and authority, could move mountains. One policy at a time. One standard at a time. One passenger at a time. Until the system that had dismissed her was forced to see her. And in seeing her was forced to change. That's not revenge. That's justice. Quiet, thorough, unstoppable. And it started with a simple choice. To refuse to let the moment pass. To refuse to accept that bias was inevitable. To refuse to believe that one person couldn't make a difference. Dr. Henderson proved otherwise. Not because she was exceptional, but because she chose to be responsible. Responsible to the data. Responsible to the passengers. Responsible to the truth. And in a world that often rewards loudness over substance, that choice made all the difference. Because the truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs someone willing to document it, to defend it, to build a system around it. And Dr. Olivia Henderson did exactly that. The gate agent laughed at her ticket, but the system learned to respect her authority. And that respect, earned through competence, defended through patience, and codified through policy, became the foundation of a more just system. Not perfect, but better. Measurably, undeniably better. And that's what legacy looks like. Not a moment, but a movement. Not a victory, but a standard. Not recognition, but change. Quiet, lasting, real.